Hi friends, welcome to my new episode of A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I'm hosting Charles Dossi. Welcome, Charles.
Very good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, Charles. For all those of you who might not know Charles yet, even though he's a very famous voice, Charles Dossi is Asia Managing Director at ConsenSys, a leading blockchain engineering company. Among his many responsibilities, he leads ConsenSys projects on central bank digital currencies with Hong Kong Monetary Authority and Bank of Thailand. Prior to this, Charles served as Head of Fintech with the Hong Kong government, Invest in Hong Kong. In that capacity, he helped found and scale the Hong Kong Fintech Week, which, as you know, is one of the most important fintech conferences in the whole world. And well, basically, he has like 15 years of prior experience in Hong Kong's private sector and is licensed to deal and invest in securities. So that's a quick summary of Charles' experience. And as you can see, he's a very relevant person for me to host on my podcast. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot in the next half hour. So I would like to start with something a bit more personal, maybe. You recently wrote a book called Blockcon, which is indeed outstanding, in which you provided, your readers with a great picture of Hong Kong's blockchain ecosystem. So why do you think that anyone interested in blockchain, or even more specifically in blockchain in Hong Kong, should read this book?
Thank you for that, Oriol. I think people should have a look at Blockcon. It's number one. It's a very fun book. It's not very technical. It's more about 21 conversations with 21 blockchain entrepreneurs in Hong Kong. Together with my co-author James DiBiasio, we decided to make it a little bit of a fun format. So the 21 interviews are going around 21 different breakfasts all over the city. So at the same time, you discover some of the global crypto elite based in Hong Kong. You also visit the city and enjoy some of the food and breakfast all around town. And what many people in the world don't realize is that Hong Kong is very quiet city. It's a very low profile city and low key, but really some of the global crypto elite is based in Hong Kong or have started in Hong Kong. So few people know that, for example, we have in Hong Kong 3 blockchain company and crypto exchanges listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange already, way before Coinbase in the US, for example. Few people know that one of the biggest crypto stablecoin, Tether, is actually coming from Hong Kong and was created here. Few people know that Vitalik, when he launched Ethereum, came again in Hong Kong to pitch the community here because there was a very interesting mix of Bitcoin OGs and blockchain entrepreneurs coming from all different kind of background. Hong Kong being a melting pot of mainland Chinese, Westerners, Southeast Asians. So there is really a lot of people and a lot of personal journeys to cover in Hong Kong, and that's really what I wanted to cover in the book. So 21 entrepreneurs, some billionaires, some dreamers, some innovators, really very interesting people to cover. And I'm sure you can get some more inspiration for the next podcast of A Digital Tomorrow. And feel free to ask me. I'll be happy to connect you with some of the personalities covered in Blockcon, the book.
Thank you, Charles. No, I mean, it's actually a great book, as I said before, because it's going to allow like anyone to learn more about blockchain. It's not just for experts, as you said, but it's for everyone. So thank you for that, because I know that sometimes it's kind of difficult to find materials that are targeted for a much wider audience in these areas.
One thing I think is interesting also for people to read this book is many people are considering right now at the end of 2021 to switch career and to enter the crypto space. And with these 21 portraits and 21 profiles of Hong Kong blockchain entrepreneurs, what I wanted to document is a personal journey, is how these people built their new career? How do they take decision to move from their respective previous careers to crypto? How a regulator went into crypto? How a Bloomberg TV anchor went to crypto? How some famous entrepreneurs decided to build the next ventures on crypto. So I think we can all receive and see quite a few people interested by the space again. And reading the book will give you 21 journeys, and possibly some of them will be inspirational for you.
Thank you, Charles. You mentioned before how important Hong Kong is as a crypto hub. I wanted to ask you something that well, many people have been asking me lately, which is it's related to Singapore. As you know, there is this well, this kind of habit when it comes to Hong Kongers to well, normally compared to Singapore in many ways. I mean, they are both competing, to be like as a financial centers. I mean, Hong Kong is already one of the most important financial centers in the world, but nonetheless, there is always this ongoing competition with Singapore. And you know that Singapore is very crypto friendly, and it's been becoming these last few years a crypto hub as well. So how do you see this coexistence in the future between the crypto industry in Hong Kong and Singapore? Or in other words, do you think that Singapore poses an actual threat to Hong Kong's status, or should we look at that more as a cooperation or symbiotic relationship rather than a competition?
I think it's a narrative which is really pleasant for media to put Hong Kong and Singapore in competition. It has been the case in the media for years and years and years on many topics, and crypto is also one of the topics, like Hong Kong versus Singapore as a crypto hub. I think the Hong Kong marketing capabilities are fairly poor. Hong Kong is very organic ecosystem. The government is extremely hands-off here when it comes to economic affairs. So the city does not have great track records, beside maybe in fintech a little bit, on promoting itself. So the media craft a sentiment globally that one place is better than the others. At the end of the day, it comes really to regulations, and regulations tend after a few years to kind of level over between different countries. So maybe sometimes one country will go faster on regulations, but eventually all the regulations will be more or less the same everywhere. So I think it comes to regulations, that's number one, and probably Singapore is much more proactive when it comes to regulation, indeed, for crypto. Is it a paradise for crypto? I think it's probably more comfortable, but it's not yet what people might think. We've seen earlier this week Binance closing his business in Singapore because they could not get the license they were expecting. So yes, there is licenses for crypto. Do they fit for everyone? Probably not exactly yet, and we have to give it some time. But definitely, Singapore is often a first mover. Then, if you extend the timeline a little bit, let's say 3-5 years, what really will define probably the biggest crypto hubs will be the volumes. The flow of business on these respective companies. And the reality, crypto is a global business. You might have some companies which are registered in the Seychelles or maybe in the Cayman Islands or somewhere, and they will be operating out of London, out of Hong Kong, or out of Singapore or elsewhere. So the most important is the flow of money. And the champion of tomorrow will be based in cities where there is actually this financial hub. And both Hong Kong and Singapore will have a great future, I think. But I don't see one taking over another. If you look at the fundamentals of finance, such as the number of banks registered in Hong Kong versus Singapore, the number of IPOs every year in Hong Kong versus some other places in the world, there is a great future for the city. So I'm extremely bullish. We need to be a little bit patient and make sure we don't get into the noisy communication of media, especially in crypto, as we know. Any small event becomes a big news. So hot is this market.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I agree. I myself last week was writing an article and I published it on China Daily called Hong Kong and Singapore's fintech scenes should be complementary. And I didn't talk about crypto specifically. I talked about blockchain, about fintech in general, but the idea was pretty much that one, that both fintech ecosystems should be complementary. I mean, we are not like experiencing any kind of actual competition because both regions or Singapore is a country, but both cities are actually, I mean, they're far enough, one from the other. Their target markets are different, the regulations are different, so I don't think we should be like regarding them as competitors.
Absolutely, I totally agree. It's like comparing maybe South America and North America. These are two different markets. So maybe for the audience, sometimes the media tends to put Asia as a big bucket where you put all the countries inside, but it's essentially a patchwork of market with different maturity and geographies which are very large. So I definitely agree with you. There are different markets. There is 4 hours of flight between Hong Kong and Singapore, and I guess there is space for leadership for North of Asia and leadership for Southeast Asia.
Now I would like to talk about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. I want to cover as well blockchain and fintech, but before that I think starting with CBDCs might be interesting. Well, because personally I've been working on this area for a while, but also because I know that CBDCs are one very hot topic right now. So I wanted to ask you first of all about CBDCs and blockchain. No, I mean, we all know that CBDCs may or may not use blockchain. For example, Project ABBA in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia concluded by stating that a potential wholesale CBDC between both countries, between both central banks, might use, and it might be beneficial for them to use blockchain. But well, we don't know for sure whether all central banks will finally use blockchain or not. So I wanted to ask you, being a blockchain expert, will the digital yuan use blockchain? And in general, do you think that CBDCs should use blockchain, at least partially?
So to the best of my knowledge and from the information we have about the digital yuan as per today, the central banks of China, PBOC, have designed a CBDC which can be implemented either on centralized database or decentralized databases such as blockchain. What is very important to notice about the e-yuan, the e-CNY, is that the architecture of the e-yuan is actually around accounts and tokens. So the e-yuan is a token, and this token is moving from one account to another. So it's very similar to what you implement with Ethereum technology, for example, which is a technology we focus on at ConsenSys. So there is this concept of account and this concept of token, and token represent money. And you can implement these accounts on a centralized or decentralized databases. So I think for the mainland domestic market, potentially the renminbi, the digital renminbi will be available on both infrastructure, depending how the payment providers or the bank wants to implement the technology. But essentially, it came at more or less a standard, and you can implement the standard as you want. For the international renminbi, I think the jury is still out. We see some experimentation. ConsenSys is involved together with the HKMA, Bank of Thailand, the Digital Currency Institute from the PBOC, as well as the central banks of the UAE on the mCBDC Bridge, together with BIS as well, Innovation Hub here in Hong Kong. And there is some experimentation being made right now on wholesale cross-border CBDCs. But most probably keeping this original design of account and token and implement this architecture principles on blockchain will make a lot of sense. I think given the progress of regulated and non-regulated stablecoin, which all of them are sitting on blockchain, it will be difficult for CBDCs to be relevant and competitive if they are not deployed on blockchain.
I see. Because
they have to compete now with stablecoins, and stablecoin is a big market now. It's 100 billion US dollar, which are deployed on stablecoins. So my gut feeling, and that's only a personal view here, is that we might see some CBDCs eventually coming as a standard, being expressed on as a specification. Which technologists and banks will need to implement, and they will probably have the choice to implement either with a centralized database or decentralized database, a blockchain system. But the blockchain will bring much more added value, and therefore will make these CBDCs much more competitive versus stablecoin. And it's really important to capture that. If there is competition for CBDCs via stablecoin, and there is today, and there will be, then the CBDCs as a product needs to be coming with the right features, the right distribution, and centralized databases will not help in this at all. So yes, blockchain sometimes have some bottlenecks, and it's not a technology which can be implemented perfectly for every single use case of money. But overall, it's a super strong value proposition. And given that the internet is evolving to what we call the Web3, the internet powered by blockchain, if money stays in the world of centralized databases, this kind of money will not be relevant and people will just not adopt it. And the risk for central banks, if your digital currency is not adopted and people start to migrate to private money, like a stable coin, or to digital currencies from metaverse or some other digital nations, you potentially expose yourself to a systemic risk that your citizens will not use your currency anymore. And that's something which is not impossible to see. So we see a lot of work from central banks in really designing the right product for their CBDCs in order for their CBDCs to be relevant and competitive in this space.
No, and that actually would be counterproductive, no, in the sense that if one of the reasons why certain or most central banks are starting to test and issue their CBDCs is precisely to some extent fight the rise of stablecoins. If then you don't use the necessary weapons to do so properly, you are kind of missing your point.
Absolutely.
You mentioned now mCBDC Bridge project. And I think it's actually a very interesting project, but I wanted to ask you if you could tell our listeners a bit more about it and how you and ConsenSys were involved in it, because I know you played a huge role in it. So I would like to hear a bit from you on this.
Sure. So the mCBDC Bridge stands for Multiple CBDC Bridge. And essentially, it's a project which started with a collaboration between central banks of Hong Kong, the HKMA, and central banks of Thailand, the Bank of Thailand. And they started to build infrastructure for cross-border CBDC transaction at wholesale level. So transactions between central banks and commercial banks only. And these projects did well. Eventually, the project phase 2 expanded in Hong Kong, and together with ConsenSys, we built a platform which was ready to onboard additional central banks. So later down the road in this project, which ConsenSys architects and build and deliver for these two central banks, as a Bank of Thailand, Bank of Hong Kong. Later on, some additional central banks came in, such as PBOC China, as well as central banks of UAE. With central banks from Dubai, essentially. So the platform was ready to get additional central banks, and ConsenSys has been building this platform to make sure that we could build a very pragmatic platform enabling cross-border payments between these 4 jurisdictions. And we announced during the Hong Kong FinTech Week last November all the different use cases which have been built on this platform. So you find a group of banks from Dubai, a group of banks from Thailand, from China, from Hong Kong, top tier banks such as Goldman Sachs, Stanchart, and some Chinese and UAE and Thai banks as well, building use cases on looking at how they could essentially leverage this cross-border platform, which allows to accelerate transactions cross-border, and which allows as well to commercial bank to essentially redeem from their central banks CBDCs and starting to transact between one another between 4 countries on this platform. So the project went very well. ConsenSys was involved in this multi-months build. So we built on Ethereum. It's a private Ethereum implementation, so a private network, and built all the different mechanisms such as liquidity saving mechanisms, as well as monitoring and kind of specific regulations for CBDCs cross-border mechanism as well, so that it can fit with the 4 central banks requirements. So it's a big step. It's a big step for the central banks. It's a big milestone for ConsenSys also to be involved in the build and put our skills and tools at work for this project. And I'm sure there will be some additional chapters to this project in the coming months. So keep your eyes on it.
I mean, it's actually remarkable now to see the HKMA working right now in so many CBDC projects, because it's not just testing the digital yuan for cross-border payments. It's also a mCBDC Bridge, which you just summarized now. It's also the technical study of the potential EHKD. So I mean, I would say, and I don't think I'm wrong, that the HKMA is actually one of the most active regulators or central banks in the world when it comes to trying to promote and study CBDCs.
HKMA started their CBDC journey in 2016. So they really took the time to investigate the technology, to investigate the use cases. And I will say beyond Hong Kong, which is definitely within the top most active countries on CBDCs, Asia in general is super active. So we at ConsenSys have been working together with the central banks of Australia on a syndicated loan platform powered by CBDCs. A few weeks ago, we were awarded a trophy by the MAS Singapore on their global CBDC challenge, where ConsenSys together with Visa, we built a retail CBDC use case and platform. Bank of Thailand is extremely active. We've been working with them on domestic retail CBDCs as well as cross-border. There is also a project which started a few weeks ago with the central banks of Korea. So I think Asia is often under the radar, but if you look purely at data, there is a lot of concrete implementations here, which are going way beyond the research that some of the countries in the West are still working on.
I fully agree. Actually, I'm a member of the Digital Euro Association. I try to bring them my expertise from Asia. And I always say whenever I give a webinar, either at the Digital Euro Association or elsewhere, I always say that Asia is to me the continent, the world, the area where CBDCs are arising much more interest, because the amount of projects that you see in Asia is much higher than in other places. I mean, it's not just Hong Kong, as you said, it's Singapore, it's Cambodia with Project Bakong. I mean, there are so many projects in so many different countries that it makes it like probably like the most active area in this world, no, when it comes to CBDCs.
Absolutely, totally.
I wanted to ask you now about Ethereum, because, well, you mentioned Ethereum now when talking about mCBDC, and even though I assume that most listeners will already know what it is, I wanted to ask you a bit more, because ConsenSys develops decentralized software services and applications that operate on the Ethereum blockchain. So I wanted to ask you, like, what is the Ethereum blockchain, and what main characteristics does it have?
So Ethereum is the world's largest smart contract blockchain. It's a 6 years old infrastructure, which is highly decentralized. It brings together close to 500,000 developers from all over the world. It's essentially a global computer, totally decentralized and totally permissionless. So anyone can start to build on this computer. It has today about 170 million wallets active on Ethereum. As I mentioned, close to 500,000 developers building all kinds of use cases, from finance, stablecoin, NFTs, digital identity, supply chain, really a very vibrant ecosystem. And essentially, Ethereum, I think, is a foundation for the new generation of internet, which we all need. We call this new generation of internet the Web 3, the number 3 generation of internet. So the Web 1 was an internet where you will only consume content. You will connect to a web page and read a web page. The Web 2 was the era of reading and writing on the internet. So you can start to have applications such as social media or different messaging system, for example. And we know how much it has changed our lives. And the Web3 is really where essentially you start to connect directly all these users without having a big company in the middle, and essentially leveraging the power of blockchain networks as well as smart contracts to develop some new permissionless and trustless applications so that people can start to interact and commerce together in a very simple way based on a global computer infrastructure. So that's a very powerful concept, which is essentially growing by an order of magnitude every year over the past 6 years. And today you see people growing businesses and spending a part of their digital life on Ethereum, should they be passionate about NFTs and collectibles, building decentralized finance applications, or many other use cases.
Yes, I mean, indeed, the idea, for example, of smart contracts is actually something very interesting, and I encourage all my listeners to dig deeper in case they want to learn more about it, in case they don't know it yet. Going back now to CBDCs, I wanted to ask you about the digital yuan, of course, and a very general question. No, I mean, generally speaking, what advantages do you think the digital yuan will have? I mean, why China decided to do it, and how do you think it's going to affect China, like business opportunities-wise, cross-border payments-wise?
So I think the digital yuan is first in the work in China for a long time, since 2016, if we relate to the documentation officially issued by the the Digital Currency Institute by the PBOC. And the advantages and maybe why the agenda has accelerated, and that's my personal opinion here. The payment industry in China has been growing very quickly and suddenly over the past years with the growth of Alipay and Tencent and the e-commerce. And essentially the payment industry became very much dominated by a few numbers of players. And I guess one of the reasons the central banks of China have accelerated the digital yuan growth was to essentially make sure that the payment industry was remaining inclusive and competitive. And by changing the nature of money, by changing the infrastructure of money, it could essentially be more inclusive of smaller fintech players, smaller companies, be inclusive of legacy banks again, and not being only in the end of a few e-commerce giants. And the advantages will be a finality of the transactions and digital money, which will have the same guarantees as paper money. So the digital yuan comes with the guarantees from the central banks of China, or any central banks if it's a CBDC, and that's a very strong proposition, because if you think of the digital payment you might have in your phone or in your wallet today, there is always someone in the middle, and there is always potentially a limited risk of this money actually not being honored. So CBDCs brings this direct access to the money from central banks, and it brings also really a very fresh, new, and super effective infrastructure, which is more transparent and I think a better platform for innovation and openness and inclusivity, making sure every fintech entrepreneurs or every fintech company gets the chance to play in the payment space again, because indeed the technology is evolving to a blockchain-based technology.
And now that 2021 is about to end, what predictions do you have for 2022 in the CBDC or even the whole of the blockchain area? Especially now that China is about to roll out massively its digital yuan, by the Winter Olympic Games. So any predictions for this year? As I said, and not just related to CBDCs, it may be related to blockchain in general.
It's prediction time, Oriol, isn't it?
Yes.
End of the year. Fantastic. Let me give it a try. So my prediction is within Q2 2022, the volume of CBDC transactions will overpass the volume of stablecoin transactions globally. And specifically with the China digital yuan, I think the numbers will be just really amazing. And these statistics will just give much more confidence to other central banks in the West to keep growing and accelerating their CBDC agenda, showing how much success is actually CBDCs in China. So that's one prediction. Another one is I think we will see new forms of NFTs. 2021 has been a big year for NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Most of them have been mostly graphical NFTs. So a representation of an image being very unique and essentially traded as a digital asset or digital collectible. But we can see at ConsenSys some very strong signs that NFT as a technology will be used in capital market very soon, and for some other use case in supply chain as well. So that's number two. A second wave of NFTs coming big time. And one part I'm very, very excited. I think we're going to start to see the top of the iceberg in 2022, and through 2025, we're gonna start to understand how our societies are reorganizing themselves around blockchain systems and blockchain networks. Is really the rise of DAOs, digital decentralized autonomous organizations. DAOs. So it's really a way to essentially organize groups, organize companies, organize group of friends, or organize people passionate about a video game or anything they might be excited by, and letting them organize a treasury, letting them organize voting systems for their different endeavors around software, around decentralized autonomous organization. So DAOs are not a new phenomena, but I think they've been growing in maturity. They start to find very strong market fit right now. We see a lot of tooling appearing in the world of DAOs. ConsenSys is involved in quite a few projects with decentralized autonomous organization, and I think within a few years we will have more friends of us working for decentralized autonomous organization, and maybe not working anymore for the traditional old school limited companies. So DAOs is something which I'm extremely excited about, and I'm preparing a project around it also. But I'll probably come back to the podcast to tell you more again when it's when it's more public.
Sure. Looking forward to it. DAOs are indeed exciting. And well, actually, 2022 sounds exciting based on what you just said. So we need to stay tuned and see what happens, but it seems exciting, of course. Now, before wrapping up this discussion, I wanted to ask you something a bit more general. Prior to ConsenSys, you used to work as Head of Fintech at Invest Hong Kong. So, of course, you know the Hong Kong fintech scene very well because you were very involved in it. So I wanted to ask you, what makes Hong Kong's fintech scene so strong? I mean, why is it so strong? And what's Hong Kong doing better than other financial centers in that area?
I think there is two things which are not easy to capture, but which are very strong advantages for Hong Kong. So number one, Hong Kong is a global financial center. So the ecosystem of finance is here. So it's just helping anything in fintech to grow from there. So just to give you some numbers, because it's very easy to get a sentiment from the latest article you might read, but if you're not sure, it's always a good habit to come back to pure data points. So you can forge a more documented opinion. And when you look at the data points of Hong Kong fintech and finance ecosystem in general, you realize there is actually really amazing numbers. So let's go quickly through these numbers. We've got 180 regulated banks in Hong Kong for 7 million citizens. So I don't know how many banks there is in Spain, but I'm sure the ratio is very different.
Yes.
180 banks regulated in Hong Kong, 160 fully licensed insurance companies, 600 stockbrokers in Hong Kong. And then you've got about 250 IPOs every year in Hong Kong. That's one IPO per day. So think about all this base of finance ecosystem and how competitive it is. So it creates a natural appetite for technology because there is competition, and there is a strong appetite for technology overall in this part of the world. So I think the fundamentals of Hong Kong are really strong in finance. Therefore, it's just pulling fintech. And then the other advantage is I think the government is not very involved it's very much a laissez-faire type of economy. So it's very liberal here. The government is here, the government gives some help here and there, but essentially the market does not leverage it so much. So good the business is. And this kind of attitude from the government creates a very organic ecosystem and very resilient entrepreneurs and very successful entrepreneurs. So if you look at the Silicon Valley, when you start your business over there, the government of California will give you absolutely no help. You will need to get a good idea, you will need to build a good team, and you will need to raise money and be credible with VCs. The same things happen in New York. You can start your company over there. I don't think there is much help from the government. And New York is like one of the major financial and fintech hub in the world. The same things happen in London. Virtually no help from the government over there. So it's just create very vivid ecosystem where you've got people coming from all over the world as a metropolis, regulations which are kind of laissez-faire first, and very much the market forces helping you to progress. So it's pushing you, it's competitive, you don't get much help from anyone, but eventually this is how the best companies are created. And this is how the global leaders also usually start. So that's why Hong Kong can compete with London and New York. And that's why they are ranking on the top 3, because they've got these key fundamentals, a strong financial ecosystem, as well as a very liberal economy in general.
No, I mean, I agree. Hong Kong has this perfect mix for developing and making its fintech scene much stronger, which is already very strong right now. Actually, as I normally say, I know it's a joke, but whenever you meet someone new elsewhere, you normally ask these people like, what's your job? But in Hong Kong, it's more about which bank are you working for? No, because it looks like not everyone, of course, but many people work either in banks or at least in the financial industry. So being Hong Kong so strong in traditional finance makes it, of course, much more like prone to become a fintech, powerhouse as well.
Absolutely.
So, this puts an end to our discussion, Charles. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you today on my podcast. We learned a lot about CBDCs, Ethereum, and I hope to be able to host you again sometime in the future. So thank you very much for your precious time today.
Thank you so much, Oriol. It was a great conversation and quality time. So thanks again for having me, and all the best to your podcast and the Digital Tomorrow community.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode. And please stay tuned for the next ones. See you.